Hello patrons, this is of course Rusty Cage, and the story I'll be telling you today is one that will only be released exclusively on my Patreon, for all of you supporters who generously donate to fund my channel's video content and musical creations. If you've already watched my recent video entitled The Stolen Slushy Machine, then you'll have an idea of the nature of the tale that I'm about to tell. If you haven't seen it yet, I suggest that you watch that video before you listen to this, so you can have a better understanding of this story. But I'll give you a brief summary for context. When I was an angsty 16-year-old living in a small and quiet country town, me and 3 friends made the foolish, youthful decision to rob a concession stand located at the community sports fields in town. The break-in was riddled with problems, as we spent hours using a hatchet to hack through 2 metal doors that led to where we thought we would find a large surplus of candy and soda, but instead found only an empty room with nothing inside but a large slushy machine, which we decided to steal and later got arrested for. But this story I'm about to tell takes place before that whole slushy machine debacle. This story will explain why we even thought that we could rob the concession stand in the first place. And in this story, I'll be discussing past incriminating events that I took part in, yet was never caught or tried for, which is why I'm only releasing it exclusively to you patrons. You see, unlike the failed slushy machine break-in, this is a story of a successful robbery that took place at the very same concession stand just half a year earlier, in the summer of 2006. In the small town where I grew up, I had made friends with a few rambunctious youths, mainly 2 other boys, who, for the sake of this story, we'll call Elliot and Roger. Elliot lived about a mile away from me, just past the community sports fields where the infamous concession stand was located. This was your average concession stand and recreation building. Just a concrete structure with 2 bathrooms, a few picnic tables, water fountains, and of course, a store counter opening up to the outside where you could purchase snacks and refreshments of all sorts. And when the stand was closed, a metal security curtain would be pulled down, blocking the shop's counter window to keep out vagrants and wild animals. Well, every day while walking home from the bus stop after school, Elliot and Roger would walk to Elliot's house by cutting through the sports fields, oftentimes stopping to hang out at the concession stand. It was a boring town with not much to do for teens except figure out ways of getting into mischief, which Elliot was particularly good at. One day while hanging out at the concession stand after it closed, Elliot and Roger noticed a small slit in the store counter's security window, which was just big enough for someone to slip their fingers into to pull up the metal sheeting. Upon closer inspection, the 2 of them noticed that by peering through the slit, they could see the full contents of the concession stand, which consisted of boxes of candy left out on the shelves, patiently awaiting to be sold the next business day. Being the crafty juvenile criminals that they were, Elliot and Roger came up with a plan to get to the candy inside. The plan was simple. They would get a long stick and put duct tape on one end of it, then feed the tape end of the stick through the open slit, slap the sticky side down on a pack of candy, and reel it back through the opening and into their greedy hands. This method seemed to work pretty well for them, but took a lot of effort and careful finesse for a small prize of a pack of Skittles or Planters peanuts. And so the 2 of them got to thinking up a new plan that would result in a major payout. One that would involve fully breaking into the concession stand where all the candy and soda could be stolen. And that was where I came into the picture. Now, when I was a teenager, I was a generally well-mannered kid. I made good grades in school and was always polite to elders, and besides the occasional incident of having the cops called on me for skateboarding on private property, I was pretty wise about staying out of trouble. But something about coming of age in a small town makes a teen feel antsy and mischievous, which I suppose I had begun feeling growing inside. Well, one day after school, Elliot and Roger came over to my house to try to recruit me in on a scheme that they had been working out to rob the concession stand. Their plan was this. On a moonless night, the 2 of them and 1 other would go to the concession stand. Roger would stand watch, while Elliot would use heavy-duty bolt cutters to cut into the metal security window, starting at the small slit opening and working around to make a hole just big enough for someone thin to slip through and unlock the door to let the others in. Once inside, each person would fill up their backpacks with as much candy and soda as they could, and quickly leave back home with their sugary loot. The problem was, they didn't have a 3rd person nimble enough to slip through the foreplanned opening. And seeing as I was a 90-pound twerp, I was perfect for the job. "I don't know," I said. This plan seems awfully sketchy. Not only does it seem prone to easily fail, but also the chance of being spotted by a patrolling police car or just someone walking by is pretty high.
Fine, Elliot snapped. If you don't want tons of free candy and soda, that's your loss. And besides, if you won't help us, then we're just gonna get Little Ricky to do it.
Little Ricky was the smallest friend that we knew. Even smaller than myself, and standing less than 5 feet tall. He was well known for getting into trouble, and so I knew that if they asked him, he would most certainly take them up on the offer. And not wanting to miss out on my potential share of stolen candy, I hastily changed my mind. Wait, alright, fine. Don't ask Little Ricky. I'll do it.
Fuck yeah,
Elliot said.
Fuck yeah,
Roger agreed. What the fuck am I getting myself into? I thought. Now, where I was living at this time, there was an old tool shed in the yard, which, if you recall from the Slushy machine story, was where all of our friends would hang out and party. And for our upcoming heist, this shed would act as our headquarters for pre-planning and post-crime celebration. The shed was ideal for this type of activity because it was secluded from streetlights and was far enough away from my house and neighbors that we could slip in and out of it without being spotted. The not-so-ideal aspect of using the shed as headquarters was that it was about a mile away from the concession stand, and seeing as none of us had cars at the time, meant that we would have to walk there and then back again with backpacks full of stolen goods. With better foresight, I believe this problem would have led us to consider an alternate plan. But we were stupid teens, and having worked up our nerves leading up to the night of the heist, nothing was gonna stop us. So the big night came around. The moon was unseen in the sky, and conditions were perfect to begin our night of crime. Dressed all in black, Elliot, Roger, and myself snuck to the concession stand with our 3 empty backpacks and Elliot's bolt cutters. This being our first time breaking into anything, we were all incredibly nervous and jumpy. Every car that drove along the nearby highway looked in our minds like a cop coming to stop our shenanigans and haul us away to jail. But pulling ourselves together and collecting our nerves, we arrived at the concession stand. Roger took his position about 30 feet away, closely scanning the highway and nearby apartment complex for any suspicious passerbys who may be coming to investigate our break-in. Elliot took out his bolt cutters and got to work cutting away at the metal security window, as I idly stood by, feeling helpless because I wasn't strong enough to help Elliot cut through the metal, but knowing that my active role in the heist was still to come. Chank! 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 The sound of each cut Elliot made into the metal pierced the still night air.
God damn, can you guys be any louder?
Roger shouted under his breath.
How the fuck am I supposed to do this any quieter?
Elliot said back.
We're cutting through metal with bolt cutters, for fuck's sake.
Understanding that our method of breaking in might be making too much noise for someone not to notice, we abruptly stopped and stood in the shadows with our ears perked up, listening closely to hear if anyone was coming to see what was making the noise. 5 minutes went by, and no activity was detected, so feeling more confident that we wouldn't be heard, Elliot began once more trimming away at the metal security window with the bolt cutters, inch by inch, working his incisions around to form the crude circumference of the slot to which I would be entering through. Chank! 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 The final cut had been made, completing the portal that separated us from our treasure. Elliot carefully removed the cutout metal circle, revealing a jaggedly edged hole entering the concession stand. And through this obscenely manufactured window, we could see in full view exactly what we were hoping for. Boxes and boxes of candy. Boxes filled to the brim with Skittles, M&Ms, Nerds Rope, Kit Kat bars, sour straws, peanuts, and anything else you could think of. And crates full of soda and Gatorade could be seen under the counter in glorious stacks that seemed to say, "Come take us all, for we are yours now." "You're up," Elliot whispered, snapping me out of my daze and reminding me that it was now my turn to climb through the sawtooth hole of twisted metal before me and unlock the door to the outside. Slowly, Elliot hoisted me up as I not so delicately squirmed headfirst through the hole, trying carefully to inch my way in, and feeling every sharp point of the crudely cut metal as it stabbed and scraped away at my stomach. Like an ungraceful sea lion, I pulled myself further inside, ignoring the snagging knives that tore at my clothes, until finally, I could rest my body on the inside counter and pull my legs through. I had made it inside. But knowing how much noise the metal sheeting had made upon entry, we knew we had to move quick in case anyone heard us. So jumping down off the counter, I darted to the door and turned the deadbolt lock, letting Elliot and Roger inside. With no time to spare, we proceeded to fill up our backpacks with as many packets of candy as we could fit, stuffing them so full that the zippers could hardly close, and quickly realizing that we wouldn't nearly be able to carry all the loot back to the shed in a single trip. Even with our backpacks crammed full of candy, there were still several crates of soda and Gatorade remaining, which put the three of us in a greedy predicament. Should we just leave with what we were able to carry on our backs, or should we make a second trip and completely wipe the place out? As it stood, our plan had been to take only our 3 backpacks worth and go back to my tool shed, a journey which was already going to be treacherous, seeing as we were traveling on foot, and in order to avoid being spotted by walking through our town's main intersection, meant that we would have to travel an extra mile or so, cutting through the woods to remain inconspicuous. So the idea of making one trip, unloading our stolen goods, and then returning to the concession stand for a second haul seemed dangerous. If someone had seen our activity and called the cops, then they would surely be hiding out, watching the crime scene for any bandits who might still be in the area.
Let's get out of here,
Roger yelped.
I agree,
Elliot agreed. Wait, I cut in. We can't just leave all this soda and Gatorade behind.
But it's too dangerous to come back for it later,
said Elliot. Right, which means that we're gonna have to move the loot to another location that we can come back to without being spotted. The idea had come over me like a brilliant epiphany from the petty crime gods. Or maybe I'd just seen too many heist movies. But I was convinced that if we stashed the remaining stolen goods on the outskirts of the nearby woods, then we could safely return for it on the second trip. Elliot and Roger agreed to the plan, and so with haste, we began carrying the crates of beverages out of the concession stand and hiding them in a secluded location away from the sports fields. If we had gone through all the trouble to get inside, then we had better get some goddamn Sprite out of it. Once all the boxes of drinks were stashed in the woods and we were sure that there was nothing else in the storage room worth taking, we put on our backpacks of candy and left the concession stand, creeping quietly across the baseball field and into the dark cover of the nearby trees. And just then, we saw something that made our stomachs jump in panic. A pair of headlights slowly crept up to the field's entry and parked pointing directly at the concession stand. Fuck, surely this was a cop. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning. Who else would be surveying the area at this time? The three of us froze. We were far enough away from the stand to not be spotted, but fearing that there may be more cops nearby, we didn't want to risk being seen running away. So we sat there in the woods and waited, silently watching the headlights as our hearts pounded in our chest, until to our relief, they pulled away. Maybe it was a cop who, tired and irritable, left after seeing no clear suspicious activity. We could never know for sure, but seeing our opportunity to leave, we took it. So like the Seminole Indians who trailblazed this land before us, we began our 2-mile journey through the thick Florida woods and back to my shed, jumping a few chain link fences, cutting through the graveyard, and sneaking across the highway. We finally made it to the tool shed and unloaded our backpacks. Piece of cake, we all agreed. But this was the easy trip. We still had one more to go, and in round 2, we wouldn't be carrying Skittles. We would have our bags full of heavy canned soda. So after a quick rest, we set off once again to the woods by the fields where we had stored the rest of the loot. By the time we arrived, the first signs of morning were beginning to show. The sky had turned from black to an increasingly brighter shade of blue. We knew that we didn't have long before the highways began populating with drivers on their way to work. Yet this was the last stretch of our journey. We were so close to success, and that gave us a rejuvenated energy, which we would certainly need for the trip home. After filling our bags up with soda and Gatorade, they seemed to weigh a ton, and none of us were looking forward to a 2-mile hike with 50-pound backpacks on. But who were we, petty thieves, to complain about the weight of our cargo? No one, that's who. So once again, we set off on our journey back to headquarters, lugging our heavy backpacks over the chain link fences, through the cemetery, and across the highway, until, sore and exhausted, we arrived back in the safety of the shed. The heist was complete. It had worked out exactly according to plan. And while I would now never advocate for stealing, at the time, our success was the greatest feeling that we had ever experienced. We celebrated with cheers of Gatorade and candy, and put the rest of our stolen goods in an old trunk with a combination lock on it, so that no one without the code could discover our treasure. And on that night, in our young world, in the summer of '06, all was well. In the days which followed, the three of us were on high alert, keeping our ears to the street for any word of the break-in or potential suspects in the crime. But we heard nothing at all. I believe this was because at the time of our heist, there were no sports activities going on, and it would be another week or two before the concession stand would be back open for business. So it's very possible that a good amount of time had passed before anyone discovered that the break-in had occurred. Nonetheless, Elliot, Roger, and myself all laid low and mentioned nothing of our crime to anyone. We didn't even touch the stolen candy or drinks for at least 2 weeks until we were sure that it was safe to do so. But once we finally unlocked our trunk of treasure, our summer vacation changed from one of boredom and pent-up angst to one of youthful royalty, and we lived like kings for weeks to come with our seemingly never-ending supply of candy, soda, and Gatorade, satisfying our sweet tooth and knowing that we had gotten away scot-free, never having been caught for our crimes. That is, until we stupidly tried to rob the same concession stand just half a year later. But of course, that story can be heard in my 2-part Slushy Machine saga on YouTube. And as for the tale that you just heard, it will remain private between you wonderful patrons, myself, and of course, my partners in crime, Elliot and Roger. I hope you all enjoyed this story. Remember, stealing is bad, so don't do it. And thank you all again for your support.